can try and win championships, and that's what it's all about. When you look from the outside and you watch this team, I know we're going to have a real good, solid hockey team this year.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Rangers. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-host, Eric Wilson. Today, we're going to be discussing why the New York Rangers should consider trading for a top six forward at this point in the season. Now, the Rangers were in a bit of a slump. They were having a losing streak, struggling to pick up some wins, but now they're on a winning streak during the most crucial point of the NHL season, but the schedule only gets more difficult from here on out. The Rangers currently have the toughest strength of schedule for the remainder of the season. So if they're looking into making this playoff push and trying to get back towards the ECF and into the Stanley Cup Finals, they really want to be that contender that we hope for them to be at the beginning of this year. They might need to make a move, shore up those lines, add some star power to the top six, and maybe try and use that as the catalyst to getting them to the Stanley Cup Finals. So we're going to discuss how they could end up doing that, why they should, maybe why they shouldn't. But before we dive into all that good stuff today, Eric, how are you doing?
No, I'm doing great. It's a shame we're back to being apart from each other for the next couple of weeks, but we'll be back eventually. But on better news, the Rangers are on a 4-game win streak. As we said, this stretch that we've been on is pretty much the most important part of the season, and we're killing it. And I'm actually, for once in my life, wearing Rangers merch on this channel, so things are.
Yes, sir, of course. And so we're going to go ahead and discuss this now, why the Rangers should trade for a top six forward. And there are some names that Eric has to mention that he thinks the Rangers should maybe take a look at. But before we do that, let's talk about why they should do this, Eric. So looking at the top six and what the Rangers have there, the offensive firepower has been inconsistent, to use that word. That's how I would describe it. Artemi Panarin has been great at assisting, hasn't really been great at scoring. Chris Kreider has fallen all the way to the bottom six. You have Zibanejad, who's had his ups, but he's also had his downs. And there is a lot of inconsistency in general just surrounding the top six right now for the New York Rangers. So, Eric, what is it that makes you think trading for someone at the midway point in the season could be that difference maker?
Well, you look at the lines that we've been running with the last couple of games, it kind of seems like Gerard Gallant has found a temporary solution, really working with the top 9 rather than a top 6 and kind of rotating the first, second, and third lines with like relatively similar ice time. But that's only like a temporary solution. You can't be exhausting all of your players that much game in and game out. Eventually, you're going to have to solidify your top 6 and your bottom 6 to divide that ice time properly. And so we kind of just need to really figure out who's in the top 6, who's going to be in the bottom 6. And there are a couple of guys out there who just keep coming in and out. You got like Jimmy Vesey, Barclay Goodrow, a couple others who keep switching in and out. And we kind of just don't have that solid guy to complete those top 6 forwards. And I think that's kind of just what we need to look for right now.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that if the Rangers are to make some splash move here and get a top 6 forward who can be a difference maker, that might propel them to having that deep playoff run. And there are some names that you want to mention, Eric, so I'll go ahead and list them off and then let you give your takes on them. The first one being Patrick Kane. Now, we've all heard those rumors. They've been going on forever. We made a video about it over the summer. Should the Rangers trade for Patrick Kane? Should they explore that possibility? Now, whether you think that's a good idea or not, it is a long shot. And whether you really want it to happen or really don't want it to happen, the likelihood of it happening is pretty slim. But if it's going to happen, if Patrick Kane is going to get traded, it's probably going to be to the Rangers. He wants to be on the Rangers according to all of these rumors, reports, and sources that we keep hearing year in and year out. The Rangers are his top landing destination if he decides to leave Chicago. So would Patrick Kane be that difference maker? Honestly, I think that you look at this team, if you throw Patrick Kane into the top 6 here, the Rangers might be the team to beat going into the Stanley Cup Finals. So, Eric, I guess I'll ask you, what kind of a difference could adding Patrick Kane to this top 6 make? Does that make us championship or bust at this point? And do you think that this is a trade that could realistically happen?
Yeah, I mean, if you would have told me back in the offseason that this is a realistic possibility, I wouldn't have believed you. You said it pretty well. It was like a long shot when we first started talking about it. But as time goes by and like these rumors keep spreading and updates, like Patrick Kane is pretty much confirmed not going to be a member of the Blackhawks when the trade deadline comes around in early March. And, all these analysts keep saying that his top choice and the most realistic option is the Rangers. So do I think it's realistic? Yeah, I think there's a very, very strong possibility, probably more likely than not, that Patrick Kane will end up on the Rangers at some point this season. But what role do I see him playing? We already have an amazing passing playmaker with Artemi Panarin, and Patrick Kane is pretty much the same guy, just maybe a little older, but slightly better. Controversial take. I don't know. But so I wouldn't really see Patrick Kane fitting in on the second line. You don't want to have Panarin and Patrick Kane just passing it back and forth to each other. They're both more of a pass first rather than shoot type of player. So I would really see him fitting in on that first line, and that's kind of where we are looking for right now. Usually throughout the season, we're rocking with Kreider, Zibanejad, and then one other just third guy just flipping in and out. I think Patrick Kane would fit in right there, even though Kreider's down on the third line. I don't think it's going to stay like that forever. So I think it's going to work out pretty well if you were just on the first line, really just getting Zibanejad those passes so Zibanejad can just do what he usually does and just rip a slap shot and score. So I think it'd be a huge difference and really help boost that first line.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with that. I think that if Patrick Kane were to enter this lineup, him, Zibanejad, or if they had him playing alongside Panarin, whatever the case might be, I think that Gerard Gallant would have a tall task at hand acquiring a player of that caliber, because you kind of have to rework your lines altogether. And it took Gallant, pretty much 2-3 months here to go ahead and figure out the lines that work. The Rangers are back on a winning streak, but it took a lot of reconfiguring, a lot of trial and error with the lines in order to figure this out and get to these winning ways. So I think that adding a player like Patrick Kane could be a huge boost to the team, but it does complicate things in terms of who's getting what amount of ice time. But I do think that at the end of the day, it's Patrick Kane. He's a tremendous talent. He's an amazing player. Maybe not the best person off the ice, but on the ice, he's as good as they come. So, when you're looking at the possibility of acquiring Patrick Kane, that really could be the difference maker that takes the Rangers from being a fringe postseason contender to being a Stanley Cup final contender. But there's a couple other players that we want to talk about that the Rangers could potentially trade for, maybe a little bit more realistic financially, rather than going for the big star in Patrick Kane. And a couple other players that aren't as big of a name, but still very solid players like Bo Horvat and Brock Boeser. Both of these players playing for the Vancouver Canucks. Besser playing for the Vancouver Canucks, but Bo Horvat, career 600 games played, 190 goals, 205 assists, 395 total points. Eric, how are you feeling about Bo Horvat, and what are your thoughts on the Rangers potentially trying to acquire him?
So out of the three names that we're discussing today, I definitely think that Bo Horvat is the least likely of the three, mainly just because this is like a new development that's happened over in Vancouver. The Canucks kept offering him contract extensions, and he just kept denying. They made one final offer. He said no. And at this point, they're kind of just going to take the best deal that they get for a trade. And you look at his stats, this season, he's played in 28 games, 20 goals, 9 assists for 29 points. He's over a point per game player. So there's definitely going to be a lot of teams that are in on this. It's a little too early to figure out where he wants to go, what teams are interested. But I definitely think it is something the Rangers should consider. They'd probably have to give up a decent amount to get a player like Bo Horvat. But, he's another great shooter. So to have him down on the second line playing with Panarin, I think it would help pretty well because, even though Panarin's playing up on the first line with Zibanejad right now, I definitely think that's just going to fix itself and just we'll go back to the normal winning ways. But I just think seeing Bo Horvat with Artemi Panarin, one of the greatest goal scorers in the league and then one of the greatest passers in the league, it's just a combination that the Rangers would be dumb if they didn't even take a look at.
Well, I'll throw out this other variable, though, for you, Eric, and you can kind of explain what your thoughts are on it. And it's the variable of money, right? Because looking at the Rangers' salary cap space, this is where we're going to have to discuss some players that the Rangers might need to trade away. Of course, if they're going to make a move for anybody, they're going to have to free up some money because currently the New York Rangers have $1.6 million in projected cap space. Now, you're talking about Bo Horvat and how great of a player he could be for this team, but his cap hit is $5.5 million this season. Remaining daily cap hit is over $3.5 million. So the Rangers would need to free a couple million in cap space. And that's where the Patrick Kane discussion gets really interesting because I don't even know if it is. I know we're saying it's realistic because that's where he would want to go. He would want to go to the Rangers if he's leaving, and that's his preferred landing spot. But his cap hit is like $10 million, and the Rangers have $1 million. So where are they freeing up all that money from when we talk about guys like Bo Horvat or Brock Besser, basically? So I guess that's just kind of we'll talk about Brock Besser, and then once we move into the next section, we're going to have to discuss the money because I agree with you, Eric. A guy like Bo Horvat could be great for this team, but I just don't know if financially it works out. But what are your thoughts on Brock Besser, and why do you think he might be a fit for the Rangers?
So Brock Besser is another guy. He's a pretty good goal scorer. However, this season he hasn't really scored that many goals. He's only played in 22 games, only has 4 goals and 16 points. So the reason I just wanted to bring up his name, just another Vancouver guy, is just I was doing a little bit of research for this, and I saw that he is on Vancouver's trading block, and all they're really looking for him right now is like a second or a third round pick. So compared to a guy like Patrick Kane and Bo Horvat, where we'd have to give up a lot of players and just a lot of the picks and all of that, just be a complicated trade. You could really just pick up like a decent guy to just help out the top 6 and add some extra depth for just a couple of draft picks. Now, he is making a decent amount of money as well, so we would have to clear something up, which I know is the conversation we're about to get into. But I think he'd be a good fit as well. He's kind of just like similar players, Bo Horvat, just not as productive this season and just a little bit cheaper.
Yeah, and let's go into that discussion about freeing up some money, right? And there's a couple players that I know you have in mind, Eric, who could be part of these trade packages. If the Rangers are to go out there and make a move for any of these players, they're going to have to trade some talent away. And a couple of those names that you might hear around in the trade rumors for the Rangers, Barclay Goodrow, who I think has actually played really well this season. I've been pretty impressed with him. I think that out of those guys that started in the bottom 6, he's risen up. I think he's playing on the first line right now, and he's playing pretty well. I think that he's had a good season, but Sammy Blais, on the other hand, has not been nearly as good. And I know you've been rather critical of him, Eric. So what are your thoughts on Barclay Goodrow and Sammy Blais, and why those two names out of any of these players? Why are those two the guys that could potentially be moved in a trade deadline move?
See, I agree. At the start of the season, Barclay Goodrow was playing pretty well, and he's been putting up a decent amount of points. 13 points in 30 games, but the last little stretch of games, like the last 10 games, I feel like Barclay Goodrow has been one of the worst forwards that we've seen. He's making a lot of dumb passes. He's making a lot of turnovers, and he's really just not helping. And I definitely don't think he's deserving of that top 6 ice time. So if we're just looking at our top 6 right now, as Panarin, Zibanejad, Goudreau, and then the kid line is currently playing as the second line, and then just the third line, Kreider, Trocheck, VC. If I had to pick someone that I need to trade away in order to get a better player, it really either comes down to Barclay Goudreau or Jimmy VC. And I think Jimmy VC has played pretty well this season, coming off of PTO, just a pretty solid depth player, pulling his weight better than Barclay Goudreau has, in my opinion. So I really just think it's one of those things where out of all the guys that we have, who's the worst one, who's the biggest liability, I think it comes down to Barclay Goudreau. And then Sammy Blais, on the other hand, obviously playing down on the fourth line. He's an extremely frustrating player, in my opinion. This season, he only has 5 assists for 5 points. He hasn't scored a goal this season. In fact, he hasn't scored a single goal in his entire tenure with the Rangers, which is only like a little over 40 games. But it's like you got to start putting the puck in the net. So if we need something to sweeten the deal, add in an extra player, Sammy Blais, I would not miss him pretty much whatsoever. I'm not a fan of him right now. So just looking at our lineup, there are guys that you're not going to trade away, like Panarin, like Zibanejad, like Kreider. It's just these other guys. It's like, who do you want to keep? Who do you not? It's definitely for me, Goudreau and Sammy Blais. I wouldn't care.
Yeah, I think that those are the most likely players that Rangers fans would be okay with parting ways with. But looking at their salaries, Sammy Blais on $1.5 million and Barclay Goudreau on $3.6 million. I don't really know if the Rangers have the ability to kind of get those guys out of here to free up space for some of these other guys that we want. Like looking at that Patrick Kane contract, I mean, Chicago is going to have to eat a bunch of that, and that's going to complicate things because then they're going to have to ask for a lot more picks or a lot more players in return in order for taking on that financial burden. And then when you look at, some of these lesser guys like Bo Horvat, for example, the Rangers could get pretty close to clearing the cap space for him by trading away Goudreau and Blais. But, trading Goudreau and Blais for Horvat is probably not going to happen just 2 for 1 like that. And yes, that'll free up the necessary cap space for the Rangers, but other moves are going to need to be made. And there's a lot of players on this team that could potentially get moved. A lot of big salary cap hits. You got Ryan Lindgren, who I don't want to move on from, but he's got a big hit at $3 million. And there's some other players. Actually, there's really not a whole lot of room to work. You've got some big contracts on this team with guys like Panarin making 11.5. Zibanejad making 8.5, Kreider making 6.5, and Trocheck making over 5. The next highest paid is Goudreau at 3.6. And I don't know if he's necessarily playing up to that salary, being the 5th highest paid forward on the Rangers. He's definitely not, in my eyes. I think that a lot of the kids and the younger guys are playing far better than Barclay Goudreau night in and night out. And I think that when you take a look at Goudreau, who's 29 years old, making 3.6, he is the prime trade candidate, even though I mentioned I like the way that he's played. I think he's been a solid player for the Rangers. He is definitely the prime trade candidate here for the Rangers. So if they're going to go ahead and make one of these big splash moves, I think it's going to be Goudreau. But Eric, if you had to pick any of these moves, what's your dream move for the Rangers at this deadline, and what kind of an impact do you think that dream move could have for this team?
Well, obviously, as we've been talking about it for months, the dream move for me would be to get Patrick Kane, but it's definitely the hardest one to make happen because, Kane's making around 10 million. We'd probably have to get the Blackhawks to retain at least half of that salary. So that means just more than throwing in Goudreau and Blais. One, Blackhawks wouldn't even accept that trade. You'd have to throw in maybe one or even more first rounders, a couple of prospects as well. It'd take a lot to really sweeten that deal because Patrick Kane is obviously a world-class superstar in the NHL right now, and he's making a lot of money. So it'd be very, very difficult to get them to do that, especially with this upcoming cap situation that the Rangers are already dealing with. We don't really have much cap space to work with, and the NHL isn't making it any easier for us. I know just a couple hours ago, I saw this update. It says Gary Bettman, the NHL commissioner, says the NHL is now projecting a $70 million remaining escrow balance at the end of the season, which would result in the salary cap rising by only $1 million this summer to 83.5. So the NHL really isn't helping out teams like the Rangers, who are kind of cap strapped right now, and we're trying to clear space. And then, at the end of this season, we got a couple of players who we're going to need to re-sign. Some of the big names being like Hedel, Lafreniere, Keandre Miller. So you look at our options here, there's really not many. I would really like to make one of these trades, and it'd be very difficult to happen, but I think it is possible. But then whoever we trade for, we probably wouldn't keep around after this season. It'd kind of just be like a rental to help us in the playoffs and then walk away, kind of like what happened with Kopp and Vetrano last season, because we got to re-sign these guys. I'm not ready to let Hedel, Lafreniere, and Miller go. So I don't know. It's a tough situation. I just want to see Patrick Kane on the Rangers, though.
Well, you do, and so do so many other New York Rangers fans. But time remains to be seen whether or not that will happen, and I guess we'll have to patiently wait to see if your dreams do come true, Eric. But I agree with you. I think that making that move, if the Rangers can somehow figure out a way to pull it off, that could be the difference. That could be what propels the Rangers to winning the Stanley Cup Finals. So we'll see if they go out there and try and make this deal get done. But it's going to be a tough one, and there's no guarantees. But some of those other names that you mentioned, Eric, they definitely have a more realistic possibility of being moved to the Rangers, even if the rumors and the hype speculation are not surrounding those players as much as it is Patrick Kane. But we'll see what goes on here. We'll keep you updated, of course, right here on Fireside Rangers. The second a deal gets made, Eric and I are going to sit down and record and talk about it. And you are all going to be able to talk about it with us down below in the comment section. Make sure you comment down below what your thoughts are on whether or not the Rangers should make a trade for a forward in the top 6, or if you think they should just keep the lines the way they are and ride to the sunset and hopefully make it deep into the postseason. Let us know down below. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this episode, and subscribe if you're new to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss an episode. We'll catch you on the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Rangers.
Let's go Rangers. Woo!
He shoots. He's